Hello everybody, my name is Qaas and you are watching This is Improv. Thank you for joining me at the writer's table. Today we're going to be talking about story arcs. For those of you that may not be familiar with the term, story arcs are pretty much maps of the story that you're writing. And what we do is traditionally we use the shape of an arc, and along that arc we have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and along that shape we write in the events of our story in the order in which they occur. That kind of helps us keep together the events and the basic actions of the story and kind of see how it goes in chronological order. I like to use it as a pre-planning technique. Right before I start any kind of story, I'll write out the story arc and kind of keep that in mind for what occurs when in the story. But different writers use different techniques. Some may not use one at all. They may just like to go with the flow and see where their story goes. And others may use it during their writing process to kind of keep track the different complexities of their characters and different plot lines. So it all depends on the kind of writer you are and the piece that you're writing and what works for that. So without further ado, I'm going to show a little demonstration of a story arc based off of a story we may all know, and I'll show you the different ways that you can incorporate them. What we have here is a basic drawn out story arc, and I'm going to use the story of Romeo and Juliet, which I'm hoping we're all familiar with. And I guess if you're not, there's some spoilers coming through, so be aware of that. I've drawn out the basic story arc and I've labeled the different parts. We have the exposition, which is all the background information that the story begins with before the characters get into their actions that cause the story to move forward. We have the rising action, which is kind of what pushes the story into the direction of the major conflicts that the characters have and that the story has, the twists and the turns that we know. The conflict is the major event that kind of changes the entire story. You have the falling action that occurs after the conflict, usually what the characters do to try and resolve that conflict, and the resolution, which is the ending of the story. So in terms of Romeo and Juliet, we have the Montagues versus the Capulets. That's the exposition, right? Right at the beginning of the story, we know that the Montagues and the Capulets hate each other. You know that Juliet is proposed to, and that Romeo is heartbroken over a girl named Rosalind. Then we have the rising action. What happens there? We have a party at Juliet's house. It's a huge ball, and that's where Romeo and Juliet meet each other and they fall in love, right? Rising action, that's what happens there. Then what happens? Well, we have the conflict. And this one's a little tricky, but pretty much Juliet's cousin Tybalt challenges Romeo to a duel because he's like, how dare Romeo comes here, and he's from the Montague family, he's not allowed in our house. And long story short, Romeo kills Tybalt, and then Romeo's banished, so he can obviously no longer be with Juliet anymore, even though they've fallen in love. That's the conflict. Well, now we have Friar Lawrence. He comes in, and Friar Lawrence hatches a plan, and Friar Lawrence says, okay, this is what we're going to do. You two are going to run away. Juliet, now she's going to fake her death, and we're going to let Romeo know that, well, Juliet's faking it, so don't worry. But the plan is that we're going to make her look like she's dead. We're going to give her a potion. She's going to be in a coma, and then when she wakes up, you can go and take her away, and you both will live off your lives. But what happens is now the resolution. So Romeo never gets that message, and so he finds out that Juliet is dead, and he thinks that she's actually dead. So Romeo goes to where she is laid to rest, and he kills himself. And then when Juliet wakes up from the coma, she kills herself too. And so that's the story of Romeo and Juliet. I think you can appreciate that it has a clear beginning, middle, end, and you can see how it goes along the arc with an exposition, a rising action, a conflict, falling action, a resolution. So that's how you would do it for a general story. But what's interesting to me is that you can use this same format for individual characters. So here I made one for Juliet. So Juliet at the beginning, she's proposed to by Paris, right? Well, we know that doesn't really work out by the title of the play. But then what happens? The rising action, she falls in love with Romeo. And then what happens? Romeo, he gets banished. And then what happens? Well, she's forced to marry Paris, and then with the plan with Friar Lawrence, she fakes her death. But then, as we discussed earlier, Romeo doesn't know that. He goes to where she's laid to rest. He kills himself, and then she kills herself. So you can see that you can also draw this out for your individual characters, and that kind of makes it interesting because you can see each character's motivations too. And finally, I did the same thing for Romeo. So Romeo starts off heartbroken over Rosalind. Then what happens? He falls in love with Juliet. Then what happens? Horatio dies, his best friend. Kind of a detail I skimmed over. Then he kills Tybalt, and then he gets banished. And then what happens? Well, then he has to run away. And then, they hatch that plan with Friar Lawrence. And then at the end, he sees Juliet dead and he kills himself. So what I think is really interesting is that we may be familiar with writing out a story arc in general of the entire story, but you can also do one for individual characters. And that makes it really interesting because then you can kind of plot the development of each of your characters and see how they relate to the overall plot and with each other. So you can see that Romeo and Juliet, both of their stories here are linked in what happens to them, right? You can see this kind of relation here, and then you can see how they all relate to the overall action of the play. So that's kind of how you draw a story arc and how I personally like to use it. Again, all depends on the writer and how they like to write their story. That was a quick rundown of a story arc, and I hope you enjoyed that. It was used on a pre-existing story, but it's always usable and applicable to a story that you're currently writing and developing. And like I said, you can customize this any way you want. You can forego a story arc altogether. You can write one in the beginning like I do. You can do one later on in the process just to keep you organized. You can also make it as detailed as you want. You can go, by each act and by each scene and detail every character's arc, or you can be as broad as you like. Just write it for the general theme. Like, what do you basically want this story to say? And, have fun with it. Make it your own. And remember, it's just a tool that, some people use, some people don't. You can do whatever that works for you and works for your story. And that's it for us. Thank you so much. Happy writing, and thank you for joining. This is Improv.